You're listening to the Post-Apocalyptic Media Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Post-Apocalyptic Media Podcast. This is episode number 74, and I am your host, Shawn, senior editor here at Post-Apocalyptic Media. And I am joined today by a very special guest, the author known as Mr. Aaron Spelker. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's good to talk to you. We actually assigned this last week, and this is a kind of an ironic twist, as I came down with the plague last week. Had a little bit of the COVID, lost my voice, but I'm all good now. And it's good to talk to you. You know, like I said, we've been talking back and forth for a little while, and I read, I've seen the reviews for your book. I've actually even watched interviews with you. This is how prepared I get for these things. Good, yeah. And it's really interesting. So this is your first book that you wrote, and you started actually writing it back in 2014, but you just finished it. It just came out last year. Now, that's right. You also have an interesting story, but I want to get into the book first. So let's talk about what the book is about.
Sure. So in 2014, I came up with this book idea that's really about my favorite topic, which is kind of global disaster type of books. And it is about a global pandemic that breaks out in the world and happens to be in the year 2020. And it's kind of very, very similar. It's actually a SARS pandemic that spread in the year 2020. And I thought of it back in 2014. So this is kind of, very, Nostradamus approach here. But, and the story is kind of broken into two pieces. One part takes place in the 14th century. It's following a family who is kind of on the front lines of the outbreak of the bubonic plague, and they're trying to, kind of run and outpace it as it kind of spreads slowly from, the east to the west and into Europe. And then the other one, as I said, the part two of the book takes place in the year 2020, and it's the outbreak of a SARS pandemic that starts out of China and starts spreading around the world. But what's kind of really unique and different is in the bubonic plague, it really kind of spread very methodically from village to village, from port to port. And in the modern pandemic, it spreads almost instantaneously all around the world, because we can get, from one part of the world to the other part of the world, within 12 hours. We can fly halfway around the world. So it kind of pops up simultaneously all around the globe, making it really hard to contain, in the novel that I write, which is kind of, a similar experience to what we saw with COVID-19 that actually broke out.
Yeah, and it is a timely, topic. I've come across this a couple times where it's kind of crazy how many people have been talking about. We've led up with, like you said, SARS has been around for a while, and different, COVID. The coronavirus itself is essentially the cold, and this variant of it, was so big, and we won't get into the science of that because everyone's been hearing that for 2 years now, 2.5 years. But the fact that it's like it's such a big deal and such a big strain of it, that it parallels your book a lot, because it's like the bubonic plague was a long time ago, SARS has been happening for a little while, but this is the big one. This is like it all comes together. It comes together with that perfect storm, like you said, where it travels more quickly across the world. The strain itself has become, mutated, and here it is happening,
Yeah, and the typical, quarantine and isolation really just doesn't work in a modern pandemic.
Yeah.
Because again, people move too quickly to really make that effective. Again, my book, so I finished writing the book, and we could get, into why I wrote it in 2019, but I finished it in December of 2019. So really, literally right before we knew anything about COVID-19. And it is very eerily similar. And that's really because, I did 5 years of, researching and finding out how modern pandemics spread, and, just how these things happen and where they're expected to come out of, and how governments would respond, or what would happen to the flow of goods, and what would happen with food distribution, and just like the supply demand pushes and pulls that would occur if suddenly everybody was getting sick. And it's eerily similar because scientists have really been talking about this for a long time. They have looked at modern pandemics and said, when, not if, but when the big one happens, this is exactly how it's going to unfold. And I just kind of wrote about that, what I had been reading in a lot of white papers and scientific journals and things like that. I just incorporated into a fictional story, but that fictional story ended up being pretty accurate to what actually occurred when that type of pandemic spread. And again, it's really coincidental that I picked SARS. It's very coincidental that I picked the year 2020 for it all to occur. But it is very in line with what all the researchers have been saying and what I had been finding as I kind of got background to write this novel.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what about the characters themselves? I know that you said there are two separate timelines. But could you tell us a little bit about the characters?
Yeah, so in the 14th century, at the outbreak of the bubonic plague, you kind of follow this family who live in Sicily. The husband is a dock worker, and a ship comes into port, basically a dead ship. It floats in, crashes into the port in Messina, Sicily, and everyone on board is dead. And that's basically kind of, in my story, the introduction of the plague, towards Europe, coming over from the eastern ports into the western ports. And he, ends up getting sick, and the whole town of Messina ends up getting sick, and his family, his wife and his son, flee. And the part one kind of follows his wife Tita and his son Luca as they try to stay ahead of this, everyone dying around them and not really understanding, because we didn't know anything about really virus spread and why it spread and how it spreads in the 14th century. They don't really understand what's going on. They just know people are dying, and they're just trying to get away from it and trying to find anywhere that's safe. And every time they find somewhere that's safe, very quickly it becomes unsafe and they have to move again. The part two follows kind of two groups of people. It follows a former soldier named Alex Volk, who is really kind of suffering from PTSD, really having an identity crisis as he lives in Texas. He's of Russian descent, living in Texas, which has a Russian community around the oil industry, but he really feels kind of like a fish out of water, and he's had a lot of trauma and injury from serving in the U.S. military, and he's just kind of spiraling. His wife is a nurse in the hospital. She again kind of comes into the front lines of this pandemic, and it kind of just pushes him even further over the edge of his already fragile state, if you will. The other part follows a young college student who is interning at a medical lab in Boston. Her name's Angela Sindile, and Angela is an intern at this infectious disease laboratory in Boston, and they kind of get tapped when this virus starts to outbreak before the public really knows what's happening. The government knows what's happening, and they kind of tap this laboratory to try to figure out how to stop this. They know it's coming, they know it's going to be bad, and they're reaching out to all sorts of scientists to secretly work on trying to find out how to solve this problem before it all comes crashing down around us. And so she is kind of on that team and starts working in, and it's kind of following her process of working through how do you solve this virus, how do you save people, and how do you make some hard choices, and as you kind of go through and do that.
I see. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, we touched on this a little earlier, but your story itself, your personal story, is interesting because when you started writing this in 2014, you were kind of like, I guess, what anyone would do. You have an idea, you start writing it down, you kind of, you're not in a hurry, and you kind of
dabble in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so something happened though in 2019 that kind of changed everything. What was that?
Right. Yeah. I had would ultimately be was the catalyst to actually taking time to write the book. In February of 2019, I was on a vacation with my wife in Cancun, and we went down to the beach and, was checking out the ocean, and a big gust of wind blew sand all up into my eyes. And I didn't really think much of it other than I had sand in my eyes and my eyes were irritated, over the course of our vacation. But the sand had cut the corneas, like caused abrasions on my corneas, and had introduced a very strong bacteria into my eyes, which by the time I got home to Boston, where I live, I had a massive infection in my eyes, and I spent 3.5 weeks in the intensive care unit while they tried to fight off the bacteria and save my eyes. And I ended up leaving the hospital completely blind. So all I have now is a little bit of light perception. Like I can tell where a window is in a room. I can tell which direction the sun is, but that's about all I have for vision now.
Wow.
So I suddenly found after that I had a lot of free time on my hands, and what am I going to do with myself? And was kind of suffering from a bit of depression. Suddenly this major life event, and I kind of was spiraling. Being newly blind, not really understanding how to do anything as a blind person. I had a couple months after I went blind, a tech specialist from the Mass Commission for the Blind come to my house and load a program, what's called a screen reader, which allows a blind person to interact with their computer. It kind of talks back to them, makes the computer talk back to them so they can hear what they're doing. And the technician who came to my house and loaded all this software on my computer and downloaded things from the internet and created profiles on my computer, did all this techie stuff. I had a conversation with him at the end and found out that he was born blind. And it was a real kind of epiphany or catalyst for me to realize, like, I got to stop sitting here and wallowing and being sad that I can't do anything. I'm blind now. People do things as blind people. This guy has a career. He navigates a computer, expertly, and does all sorts of things that I don't know how to do when I was sighted. And so why am I thinking about all the things I can't do? Let me figure out what I can do. And so with the new software on my computer, I sat down and I opened up the Word document that I had taken, notes over the 5 years that I had been, thinking about this book. And I started typing, and I spent the next, 7-8 months writing the book until it was done at the end of December 2019. Because I really made it a goal for myself when I started that I wanted to be done the book before 2020 started. So I got it in by about a week. I had finished writing it.
And now you know why you had to get it done.
Yeah, exactly. It was very frustrating. I mean, again, that's obviously. Lots of death and destruction, and so that is very tragic. But on a personal note, with that put aside, I was watching the news and I was just like, oh, that's in my book. That's in my book.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like the real life was stealing the story that I had worked so hard, 5 years researching, but then had worked so hard over the past year of, learning how to write as a completely blind person and work on it. It felt like it was taking a little bit away from my story, because at that point, at the beginning of March, when COVID actually started, I had finished my first round of revisions of the book, and then I had to send it out to other people to read and give me their comments, and then got to send it out to editor. It's one of those things that I didn't really realize, having never written a book before, but when you're done writing the book, there's a whole lot more work that's done after you're done writing the book before that book is in print and up on websites to be sold. I never realized how long all that takes, but lessons learned. So
yeah, and that's a good point too, is you say that this is your first book, you've never been an author before, and so this was, of course, we know what inspired you, but what got you to that point? Like, what did you do before this?
So I was a small business owner. I owned a financial services company, helping companies set up their retirement plans, like their pension plans, 401k plans, 403b plans. So that's primarily what I did as my day job. The writing of the book really, I had read 2 articles that happened to be one about the bubonic plague, and within the same week I happened to read one about the spread of modern pandemics. And I had read those 2 stories pretty close to each other, and I had a dream that brought those 2 storylines together that is probably about 80% of what the book is. So 80% of what you would read if you read the book is right out of the dream that I had.
Wow.
You know, it was a fully realized dream. All the characters, you know, that are in the book, I dreamed about these characters. And so when I woke up from that dream, I was like, that was like watching a movie. It was so compelling. You know, never thought about writing a book before that, but I was like, this is something special and I should do something with this. And so I, you know, that day when I woke up, I started taking some notes and I started doing some research. And like I said, I thought I had all the time in the world. I just dabbled in it. I'll do this one day. You know, is it this a cool little side project when I have a couple hours here and there? But, you know, it ultimately, writing the book really was a lifesaver for me, because it would have been very easy to continue to slip into a depression and continue to wallow and have self-pity. But the starting of writing the book and finishing writing the book really kind of arrested that path. You know, it allowed me to start accomplishing something. You know, look, I wrote, you know, a chapter today, or I, you know, thought up of a new storyline. You know, it gave me something to work on, focus on. That was not, I'm blind. Yeah. And it, at the end, gave me something that I accomplished and achieved as a blind person that, you know, I never actually achieved as a sighted person. So it gave me, you know, a real sense of purpose. And I think it was a really amazing form of therapy for me, to allow me to kind of take the time to process, you know, behind the scenes. You know, your mind's always working, right? So I'm writing the story, but I think in the background, my mind was always processing, you know, my new reality and what I was facing as going from a sighted person to a blind person.
Yeah. You know, whenever I have authors on here, I like to ask, you know, what kind of advice they would have for people who would like to get into writing, and maybe they have stories in their head that they'd like to get out. I feel like you have a very unique perspective on that. But do you have, what kind of advice would you give for someone like that?
I mean, there's a few things. You know, I would just say, you know, start writing. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, I have this idea, but they never start typing it or writing it. Like, you know, just start putting it together, because I found it all started flowing. You know, once I started really getting into it, you know, more and more was able to just spill out of me of the story. And, you know, I kind of, you know, really felt each character and could feel like I was telling their story. You know, have, you know, several people read your book and give you feedback, because you're not going to see plot holes, you know, that you created because you created them. So let other people kind of point out things that you might not need to clean up from a storyline. You know, have a good editor, do a lot of editing yourself, and, you know, get a professional editor. Nothing, you know, more distracting than a book that is poorly edited, because it just kind of starts taking out the story. So, you know, do all you can to, you know, get you know, editing through friends, through, you know, I would suggest hiring a professional, even though it can be expensive. But I think it's ultimately well worth, you know, the project that you're putting forward, to put forth the best project you can. And, you know, as I said early on, there's a lot of work that's done on the back end. You know, you finish the story, but, you know, before that actually gets into print somewhere, you know, it's probably up to a good year before that's actually going to happen. And then after you publish it, there's a lot of work to be done in marketing it, because there's something like 2,500 books that are released a day, and to get your book, you know, heard among the masses or seen among the masses, I mean, you really have to kind of get out there and tell people it's out there, and come on podcasts and get interviews and things like that. I mean, that's the only way that you're going to be heard, you know, from all the noise of all the different books that are coming out I mean, 2,500 books a day. So, I mean, you can imagine, you know, how quickly you get lost in the shuffle. So, you got to constantly market it. I mean, my book's been out almost a year now, and I've done, you know, dozens of podcasts. I've done TV interviews. I've done radio interviews. I've done print interviews. You know, so just, you've got to constantly be out there letting people know, because they won't know about your book unless you tell them about it. Yeah,
very true. What about another one? Are you thinking about maybe writing a second book?
Well, funny you should say that. I had a dream just last week that was a very similar experience. That was this amazingly well put together story that I dreamed. And I woke up at like 3 a.m. and I wrote everything that I could remember down. And so now I'm kind of tossing potentially that around. It's very different. It's more kind of like a detective novel. kind of following a washed-up detective as he kind of stumbles upon a conspiracy and tries to unravel it. So a very, very different story than what I had written the first time. But that's one that just kind of popped in my head that I'm now kind of tossing around as maybe the next thing that I do for a writing assignment.
So we have to be ready for that one to come true too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you said that. I mean, my kids kept telling me, like, you got to write your next book where, our family wins the lottery. That's something good happened for us. I mean, it is that book is very. I mean, even as I read it now, I'm kind of far removed from 2019 when I wrote it. I kind of forget that I wrote it, and so I read these things. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so similar to what happened, and I kind of forget that I'm the one who wrote wrote this prophetic thing. So but yeah, it was fun. It was a fun experience to do if you have the time to dabble in that and take the time to write something that you have an idea. It's really a wonderful feeling to hold a book in your hand that has the words that you've written on it, or to see it out on Amazon or Barnes and Noble websites that it's for sale. It's a cool experience.
Yeah. I imagine it's one of those things where, especially since you've been thinking about it for so long, it's been in your head for so long, and to finally get that out. I don't know, I guess this is kind of a strange question, but do you feel like this is something you were meant to do more than anything you've done as far as career wise?
No, I am. I would very say that I am, a amateur writer who was inspired. I mean, I've done some writing, that is more like financial writing, about the economy and the stock market, and I've written for newspapers and trade journals for that. But that's a very different type of writing. That's factual based, evidence based. Fiction writing is a very different way of writing. And I still have a long way to go before you would hold me up against any a Stephen King type of writer. I'm still in my infancy. I got a long way to go. But you don't get better unless you do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I've taken my first step, and hopefully I'll take some more.
Yeah, definitely. Great point. Yeah. All right. Let's see. I'm looking through your some of the information here about you. And I think it's interesting, the kind of the progression of the story of your story itself, and I don't know. I just feel like it. Not only that, but also the story. It's the book itself. You have a kind of a breakdown of the different facts of things that happen in the book versus what happened, in real life. Some of these are like, I think, even down to the little ones, like the canceling of the 2020 Olympics. It seems like, I mean, who would, think about that? I guess it's such an important, like, little detail, it was, and who would have ever thought that would happen? Yeah.
I mean, it was, that was an early thing. That was not part of my, my dream per se. But when as far back as 2014, around that time, I said, it would be really cool if this virus cancels the Olympics, because that, it never happened. And so I started looking, okay, well, what Olympics are coming up? And, there was Brazil, I think 2016, and then it was Japan 2020. And I was like, I think Japan would be cool because I want this virus to start in China. So that would be like right in the back door of where the virus starts, and the Olympics for Japan, there's such a country that really wants to put on a spectacle and really, do well with the Olympics, that it would be a real blow if it had to be canceled. So that's how it really got focused on the year 2020 for me writing the story. That's how I ended up picking 2020, because it really was all about the canceling of the Olympics. And then what fell in nicely is when I picked 2020, and worked backwards of how old certain people had to be, it really fell into place, where I also wanted those people to be in their life for other world events. It just worked out like, this person, I want them in their, whatever, early 20s when September 11th happens. That works out perfectly. That'll put them right in that time frame. So it all kind of worked out that 2020 ended up being the perfect year, because everyone ended up being just the right age that I wanted them to be for different points of the story.
Wow. All right. So the book is called The Bubonic Reorder.
That's right.
You can find it on Amazon. Where else can you get it?
It's really, all the places that you can buy books. It's Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. I think any of those sites that you go to, you can find it. On Amazon tends to be where most of the reviews are. So if you want to hear what other people are saying about the book, I would suggest going out to Amazon, be able to read the reviews there. And please, if you read the book, very important to authors, please write a review. Even if it's short and sweet, reviews are very important to authors because it helps them get into those Amazon algorithms to get, if you like this book, maybe you'll like The Bubonic Reorder. The more reviews we have, the more we get into those other algorithm lists, if you will. So please, if you read it and like it, please write a review. It'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, and it looks like you're doing well. The 5 stars are, it says 4.8 out of 5 total out of all your ratings. That's really good. So it's cool. People are really enjoying it. But you can pick it up there, like you said, anywhere else where you find print books, Target, Barnes & Noble, all that.
The other thing I did, if I don't know if any of your listeners are blind, I also donated the book to the Bookshare program, which is ebooks that are made available to people who are blind or have print disabilities. It makes the books available for free for them. So I donated to Bookshare. So if you're blind or have a print disability, you can go out to Bookshare and just download my book for free from there.
Very nice. That's cool. Good information. Okay. Yeah. Check that out when you get a chance. They're on Amazon and your favorite bookseller. But thank you, Aaron, for coming on the show. This is definitely a pleasure. I always learn so much from these interviews, and I'm just like jotting down notes. And so I think your story is amazing. I think the book sounds intriguing. I'm definitely gonna have to pick it up. And our listeners can do the same.
Yeah, well, thank you. The great thing is, apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic is my favorite genre. So I'm really glad I dreamed in, what is my favorite genre. It made it easier to write it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Anyone who wants to check us out, you can check us out on our social media. Anything over at postapocalypticmedia.com. We have anything on there as far as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok. We have all that stuff on there, so you can check us out there. In the show notes for today, I will have a link to Aaron's book, and I will have a link to more information about the site itself and even for the book itself.
And I have a Facebook page too that I think I shared the link with you, so you can.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll put that in the notes for today as well, so you can check that out.
Perfect.
But I want to thank you again for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So until next time, stay alive out there and always be ready for the big one. Thank you.